All right. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series. My name is Ahnaf Kalam, and on today's episode, I will be both your moderator and your speaker. Most of you, of course, know me as the host of this podcast series, but for those of you not familiar, I have also been a writer and researcher for the Middle East Forum since about 2017, writing largely on Islamism, foreign policy, and South Asia. So, for today's episode, I will be discussing the recent and ongoing surge of Islamist extremism in Bangladesh. Now, as usual, I will begin today's episode with a short lecture on our topic, and then I will open it up to the audience for your questions. Now, you might have to bear with me a bit here because I will be both reading and moderating and answering your questions here, so I'll do my best with that, and you might just kind of have to be patient with me. Now, there is a lot to discuss in this topic in a relatively short amount of time, so I've kind of broken down my remarks into a few short segments here. So I'll begin with some brief background on the history of Bangladesh. It'll provide some important context to understand what is going on today in the present. So to begin, Bangladesh is not a country that most people think of every day. And in fact, many people probably wouldn't have even heard of it had it not been for the George Harrison performance at Madison Square Garden in the 70s. But no less, Bangladesh is home to 170 million people, and it is indeed the third largest Muslim majority nation in the world. Bangladesh was forged out of the crucible of 1971's liberation war with Pakistan. And for years, in what was then called East Pakistan, Bengalis faced immense systemic discrimination from West Pakistan, which would then go on to spark a major Bengali nationalist movement led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who's the leader of the Awami League Party and is still considered the father of Bangladesh today. Very soon after, of course, Pakistan would launch Operation Searchlight in March 1971, which unleashed a brutal and bloody genocide on the country. Most estimates suggest 300,000 to 3 million Bengalis were massacred, and it's estimated that between 200,000 and 400,000 women and young girls were raped as a weapon of war. The Pakistani forces also targeted Hindus, academics, liberal intellectuals, and religious minorities. Now, Jamaat-e-Islami, an Islamist party, and one which is still very active both in South Asia and in the West, we'll come back to that here in a moment, was collaborated and basically enabled Pakistan's military to commit the massacre by forming militia groups like Al-Badr, which of course would go on to massacre, maim, desecrate, rape, and just commit horrendous atrocities during that conflict. It wouldn't be until late 1971 when India and their intervention in this conflict would go on to secure Bangladesh's independence from Pakistan. And as a result, Mujibur Rahman's secular vision would ultimately shape the 1972 constitution of the brand new state. But then in 1975, the assassination of Mujibur Rahman triggered decades of instability, with military regimes taking power in the 1980s who declared Islam the state religion and thus would sow the seeds for the Islamist resurgence we see today in light of modern events. Now, with that brief background, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about what happened in the 70s. Moving into what's happened more recently in modern Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina, the recently ousted former prime minister of Bangladesh and the daughter of Mujibur Rahman, ruled as the prime minister of Bangladesh between 2009 and 2024, initially earning praise for economic growth and for curbing anti-Hindu and anti-Indian insurgencies. But as we see, regularly across the world, her regime would go on to turn increasingly authoritarian. And at least that's certainly how the Islamists and the conservative Muslim factions in Bangladesh saw things. By and large, she has been criticized for, among other things, jailing opposition leaders, allegedly rigging elections, and for outright banning the Jamaat-e-Islami party in 2013 because of its 1971 involvement in the genocide and for its war crimes. Her International Crimes Tribunal convicted many Jamaat-e-Islami officials and even executed several of them, including one guy called Mutiur Rahman Nizami in 2016. And I bring that up because that move in particular did a considerable deal of damage in terms of inflaming the already disenchanted and angry Islamists. Hasina's security forces, notably the Rapid Action Battalion, or RAB, were implicated in over 600 enforced disappearances since 2009. Recent reports have also emerged describing a secret prison facility in Bangladesh called the Ainaghar, which in Bengali translates to the House of Mirrors, which is also run by the RAB. It held a number of dissidents incommunicado, and there has even been reports of countless torture and killings coming out of that facility. In December 2024, interim government reports detailed an estimated 3,500 disappearances, many of them which were directly linked to Sheikh Hasina. Now, the tipping point last year came in June when the Bangladeshi Supreme Court decided to reinstate a job quota system which favored the descendants of the 1971 Liberation War, and this was seen as a tool to reward the Awami League loyalists. In response, students under the banner of Students Against Discrimination protested and demanded reform, which Sheikh Hasina, her response was rather ruthless. Her security forces then killed up to 1,400 protesters in what we now call the July massacre, with 77% of them, according to the UN, dying from gunshot wounds. Branded a crime against humanity, the violence galvanized a broad coalition. Students, secularists, liberals, and unfortunately Islamists into the July Revolution. And then finally, on August 5th, Sheikh Hasina fled to India, thus ending her 15-year rule of Bangladesh. Now, something that's kind of interesting to note is that this uprising, in many ways, echoes the Iranian 1979 revolution. Like Sheikh Hasina, the Shah was seen as a Western-backed autocrat whose repression united students, academics, secularists, and liberals. But in Iran, the Islamists, under the Ayatollah Khomeini, hijacked the movement, thus completely sidelining and subjugating the moderates. Bangladesh's coalition was similarly unprepared for the Islamist surge that followed, a miscalculation that is now tearing down the nation's once secular fabric. People have also made similar comparisons to the recent ousting of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria, which has likewise given way for violent Islamists like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham to take its place and wreak havoc on religious minorities, which of course is not to say that Sheikh Hasina's regime is anywhere as ruthless and murderous as the Assad regime, but I digress. Now, we come to the present day. With Sheikh Hasina gone, we now have Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize-winning microfinance pioneer, as the interim leader who came to power on August 8th of 2024, just 3 days after the ousting of Sheikh Hasina. Hailed by the West as a democratic savior, Muhammad Yunus faced an extremely fractured and precarious nation, which he's now tasked with presiding over. Most people in Bangladesh and generally across the world were generally optimistic about the news that Muhammad Yunus would be taking over based on his resume and his past experiences. But then his most controversial move came on August 28th when he decided that he would lift the ban on Jamaat-e-Islami and reverse Sheikh Hasina's crackdown on the genocidal Islamist group. Founded in 1941, Jamaat-e-Islami opposed Bangladesh's 1971 independence, and they aided Pakistan's genocide against Hindus and secularists. Its militias, like al-Badr, committed heinous atrocities. Yet Jamaat-e-Islami now, today, claims to be a modern liberal party of reform, despite the fact that it's still pursuing its ultimate goal of establishing a total Islamic state in Bangladesh. And outside of Bangladesh, Jamaat-e-Islami front organizations like the Islamic Circle of North America continue to conduct operations in America and the West. And actually, if you're interested in learning more about that, my colleagues at the Middle East Forum have documented these links between the Islamic Circle of North America and Jamaat very extensively on the Middle East Forum's website. So if you have a moment, I highly encourage you to check out their research. But anyway, Jamaat-e-Islami and other violent Islamist allies like Hefazat-e-Islam, whose goal is also to establish Sharia law across Bangladesh, have exploited the post-Sheikh Hasina vacuum and unleashed total chaos. Some of you might remember Hefazat-e-Islami's 2021 attacks on Hindu villages all over social media, but sadly we now know that those would only serve to foreshadow the much more significant wave of Islamist violence today. Since August of 2024, over 2,000 attacks on Hindus have been reported, including 200 incidents taking place over the course of just 3 days, and at least 5 brutal murders being reported in the chaos. Countless temples have been desecrated, and widespread looting has been pervasive across Bangladesh, according to the Bangladesh Hindu, Buddhist, Christian Unity Council. As well, minority Muslim sects like the Ahmadis and the Sufis, who the Islamists, of course, do not regard as being legitimate Muslims, have also been targeted, with 45 Sufi shrines being attacked, and notably the secular Lalon Mela festival in Bangladesh being shut down by these Islamists. Jamaat-e-Islami's student wing, Islami Chhatra Shibir, also celebrated the attacks and in response went on to follow suit and attack a number of secular, Sufi, Ahmadi, and Hindu sites. Now, Muhammad Yunus's response to all of this has been completely inadequate, to say the least. He has dismissed the massive surge in Hindu-targeted violence as simply being propaganda, despite the United Nations and Amnesty International reports saying contrary. And while he continues to brush off the spate of Islamist violence, the attacks continue almost every single day. Just 2 days ago, a prominent Hindu community leader called Bhavesh Chandra was savagely beaten to death by Islamist mobs. And again, Muhammad Yunus's response has basically just been silence and indifference. Yunus's attorney general's push to remove secular from the Bangladeshi constitution and his recent decision to release very notorious convicted terrorists from prison, for example, have only contributed to the Islamist cause and emboldened these extremists. And like Iran's post-revolutionary chaos, the secularists in Bangladesh are being sidelined and targeted while toxic Islamists continue to gain ground unchecked and unchallenged. So why does all this matter to us here outside of Bangladesh and South Asia? Well, the Islamist surge in Bangladesh is not just a regional crisis. I would say it's a direct threat to Western interests in South Asia and to our national security as well as the national security of our allies in the region. Now, Bangladesh's strategic role in the Indo-Pacific makes it critical for countering China's ambitions. Hasina's pro-India stance at the time checked Beijing's influence, but Muhammad Yunus's pivot towards Pakistan and China through the use of new trade routes and military talks tilts this shift of balance once again towards China. China's investments like the Padma Bridge, and Pakistan's ties to Jamaat-e-Islami through its Inter-Services Intelligence Agency, or ISI, basically the Pakistani equivalent of the CIA, essentially risk turning Bangladesh into an anti-Western hub. Violent extremists like the Al-Qaeda-affiliated Ansarullah Bangla team and the ISIS-linked Jamaat al-Mujahideen thrive in this chaos. If you'll recall, for instance, the 2016 Dhaka bakery attack that killed 20 people, likewise, a further slide toward Islamism could ultimately destabilize India's northeast, which is a region that is absolutely vital to American allies. Compounding this is Bangladesh's intensified hostility toward Israel, something I've written about in the past. And this is a stance that I believe undermines what I think could be a number of potential mutual benefits to both of these states. Both nations, of course, were born from genocides, Israel after the Holocaust and Bangladesh after the atrocities of 1971. And yet, Dhaka has never recognized Israel, even going so far as to bar its citizens from traveling there. Up until very recently, every Bangladeshi passport stated explicitly that, quote, "This document is valid for travel to all countries of the world except Israel." Now, this hostility, of course, rooted in Muslim solidarity across the globe, ignores Israel's early recognition of Bangladesh in 1971, when Islamist nations ignored Pakistan's genocide of their fellow Muslims. Israel was one of the very first states to recognize the sovereignty of the new Bangladeshi state, as a matter of fact. And of course, the October 7th Hamas attacks, with their echoes of 1971's savagery and utter inhumane evil, should, you would think, resonate with Bangladeshis. Yet, Muhammad Yunus's government has doubled down on anti-Israel rhetoric and has aligned with Jamaat-e-Islami's anti-Semitic narratives. Now, if ever there was even an inkling of a shadow of a chance of a doubt that Bangladesh could ever improve their diplomatic ties with the Jewish state, that is all but completely now snuffed out and gone in this current climate. These potential diplomatic ties could have brought Israel's expertise in counterterrorism, intelligence, and technology, fields critical for Bangladesh's fight against Islamists and mounting tensions over climate challenges in the low-lying terrain, to the advantage of the Bangladeshis. Israel's innovations in water management and cybersecurity could transform Bangladesh entirely, while its alliance with India, a key Bangladeshi partner, would offer a model for cooperation. But by rejecting Israel, Bangladesh isolates itself from a very valuable ally and thus further aligns itself with the anti-Western bloc. And so I think US policy should respond decisively. The Biden administration's soft approach of criticizing Sheikh Hasina while maintaining USAID funding to Bangladesh has failed entirely to deter extremism. But more recently, following the wave of violence in Bangladesh, President Trump's condemnation of Islamist violence against Hindus and other minorities as barbaric signals I think, a welcome and a much-needed shift in the region. The US must continue to be firm in its stance universally that violent Islamist organizations cannot and will not replace, even nominally, a secular democratic society. Washington should, I think, to this end, consider the following. Washington can maybe impose sanctions on interim government officials guilty of enabling these jihadist extremists, including those who unbanned Jamaat-e-Islami. Washington can also demand that Bangladesh holds elections by late 2025, and I think they can do this by using trade preferences and IMF loans as leverage to ensure Muhammad Yunus's compliance. Critically, I think the US must deepen ties with India to counter China and Pakistan and to send a signal that Bangladesh cannot just become their pet proxy state. As I speak, I understand that Vice President J.D. Vance is currently in India for a 4-day trip, which will include talks with Prime Minister Modi. Now, personally, I have no idea what is on the agenda for these discussions, but we can only hope that it involves a deep discussion on containing the Islamist surge in Bangladesh. And then finally, domestically, what we can do is I think our intelligence and security agencies should do a deep and thorough investigation on South Asian Islamist front organizations operating openly in the West, such as the Islamic Circle of North America. Now, by and large, the activities of organizations like these are often well within the limits of the law, making it difficult to outline the scope of what actions can actually be taken against them. But that doesn't mean that the ideologies they propagate do not have the potential to elevate problematic individuals and radicalize entire generations. Now, I realize I've been rambling here, so I'm just going to wrap up and then I'll go to audience questions. But to conclude, the July Revolution, like Iran's 1979 revolution, was fueled by righteous anger, no doubt, but the risks of being hijacked by Islamists proved not to be worth the gamble in this case. And Muhammad Yunus simply must do more to protect minorities in the country he is looking after. He must rein in the extremist and he must maintain Bangladesh's secular constitution. And the West, especially the United States, cannot afford complacency in given the climate here. A Bangladesh dominated by Islamists would destabilize this region, empower China, and undermine decades of democratic progress. The stakes are high, not just for Dhaka, but for global national security. Thank you. With that, I will open the floor up to questions. I see a few of them pouring in. Give me just a moment, and I will look through them here. Um, so let me start here with a question from a colleague of mine, Dexter Van Zyl, the editor of our Focus on Western Islamism publication, who says, several weeks ago, I struck up a conversation with someone from Bangladesh on the streets of Boston. I wouldn't be surprised, Dexter, if I know them. I asked him about Asad Noor, the human rights activist who has been targeted with death threats, and he knew who I was talking about. He was contemptuous of Asad Noor, prompting me to ask what he thought of Jamaat-e-Islami, and he was supportive of Jamaat's agenda. I asked him about Sharia and whether he thought it was a good idea. I even asked him about the treatment of Jews under Sharia, and he openly admitted that things would not go so well for the Jews. He said this after we walked past a Jewish family in Boston celebrating Shabbat. This individual had two jobs, a pleasant demeanor, and looked like he was intent on making it in the United States. I would like to think that people intent on advancing themselves in the American economy would abandon such extremism, but clearly that was not the case with the young man who was very polite during our conversation, during which he expressed open support for Islamist supremacism. So I'm confident in my recollections. We see the Muslim Ummah of North America promoting such ideas. And then to the question, in your experience, are such ideas common to the Bangladeshi diaspora in the United States? How much support do they offer to Muhammad Yunus's supremacist agenda, and what does your gut tell you? That is a big but a very good question. I will answer this a little less by referring to what's actually going on in Bangladesh, and I will defer to some of my personal experiences growing up as a Bangladeshi American here. Um, Plenty, if not, I would say most of the people in my experience in my local Bangladeshi community here, like you said, are people trying to make it. Oftentimes, they're very well educated. They work in the medical field. They are engineers. They're pharmacists, and I would say they are making it. And there is, I think, a pretty stark difference about what a lot of these people, how they behave in American society and day-to-day life, and then what some of their beliefs might be behind closed doors when the public isn't around to hear them. And I hate to say this, this is not exclusively relating to Bangladeshi communities, but I think this is something that Muslim communities as a whole in the West should grapple with, and it is the dirty little secret among Muslim communities that anti-Semitism is simply prevalent no matter where you go. It's almost unavoidable. It's the exception and not the rule in my experience that when I meet other Muslims or people who grew up in Muslim backgrounds or Bangladeshi backgrounds, they all by and large have the same view of Israel and of Jews. Um, of course, as I mentioned in my remarks, a lot of this stems from Muslim solidarity globally. Many of these people are not very familiar even with the specifics of Israel and the conflict with Hamas. And, they just kind of grow up in their culture knowing that I'm a Muslim, therefore I must stand with the Muslim Ummah. And in their perception, what they see is that it is under attack by these evil, genocidal Zionists or whatever it is they believe. And I think that Muslim communities as a whole need to have a deep reckoning with that fact about what happens in their own communities. Now, I hope I answered that without rambling too much here. Moving on to a question from Andrew Rosemarine, who a regular viewer of this show. He's a international lawyer based out of the UK, and he asks, Britain has a very strong relationship with Bangladesh and some influence. What should the British government do to improve the alarming situation you've described? Now, I'll do my best to answer this as I am not a UK citizen, and as I understand it, the British government has their own problems with Islamism and the rise of Islamist organizations gaining a lot of momentum and a lot of traction in the wake of particularly the October 7th war with Israel and Hamas. Um, I'm sure there is, of course, in the UK, there is an enormous population of Bangladeshis. And if you go to East London and visit places around like the Brick Lane area, you'll find entire enclaves where more people speak Bengali than they speak English, and you will see city blocks where the women are wearing full burqa covered from head to toe. The men are wearing salwar kameez with long beards. And one of the things that was, I mentioned this in my last podcast with Dominic Green on Islamism in the UK. One of the things that fascinated me when I visited these Bangladeshi areas in London was that in addition to these, cultural centers, restaurants, etc., there were Islamist organizations with direct links to terrorism operating outwardly, openly, unchallenged and unchecked. And people were just walking by casually, walking in and out of these facilities. And of course, with that, there's all sorts of problems that poses to British society. You have the emergence of parallel legal systems that enable heinous crimes like child marriages and genital mutilation to go on basically unchecked inside of the United Kingdom. Of course, you have the emergence and the empowerment, I'd say, of Islamist organizations like Hizb ut-Tahrir in the UK that are now marching by the thousands and tens of thousands in the streets of the UK demanding Islamist rule and Sharia law, and that they're very open that they want to turn the UK into a caliphate. So, while I'm not entirely sure what the United Kingdom can do with regards to its diplomatic response and efforts in Bangladesh, what I can say is that I'm not very optimistic that they can do much until they curb their own problems with Islamist extremism going on inside of their own borders. No, I hope I answered that okay. Um, an anonymous attendee. How do you explain the presence of the cartoon picture of Islam's prophet on the wall behind you? You're, of course, referring to the Charlie Hebdo magazine there, which many of you know is the French satirical publication. I would maybe consider the equivalent in the US to be what was like Mad Magazine or something. And they have a long history of just bashing and lampooning and very, very crass and vulgar in a very vulgar fashion. Not just Islam, by the way, but really anyone and everyone. They have a long history of going after Catholic priests. You can't see it in the shot. There's another Charlie Hebdo I have framed on that subject. But no, the reason I have that framed actually is because I am an ex-Muslim, and one of the things that really made me consider that decision to leave was when the Charlie Hebdo attacks happened in Paris. And at the time, even as a practicing Muslim, I was very much an absolutist, so to speak, on free speech, especially in a place like France where they have laïcité. And the bloodshed and the violence inside of a secular democratic society against French people for exercising their free speech uh, in the most innocent form possible, which is by making a joke in a cartoon. That set off a lot of alarms and triggers for me, and it got me to do a lot of research. And I think it's because of that crude drawing of Muhammad that my life looks the way it does now. So I hope that answers your question. We're reaching the end here soon. We do have a lot of questions here. I'm doing my best to read through and moderate them here. I think we have time for maybe one more. So I will go to a question from Lokman Kurdistani, who says, "Thank you for your insightful presentation. Could you clarify Pakistan's position in relation to Bangladesh? Do Bengali Islamists maintain any connections with Pakistan?" So, Pakistan, of course, I've written about this as well. I think they have a troubling alliance, at least on paper, with the United States and the West. Pakistan is known for, you know, they are funding and arming and training Islamist militias and terrorist groups in the federally administrated tribal areas of Pakistan, and they, excuse me, they continue to threaten the security of Indian allies in the Jammu Kashmir region. Uh, Jamaat-e-Islami is, of course, a group that is active and present in Bangladesh. The two major parties, at least up until the ousting of Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh, were the Awami League, which is the secular party founded by her father, Mujibur Rahman, when Bangladesh became a country. And the other prominent party is the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which has been accused by many inside and outside of Bangladesh of having ties with Jamaat-e-Islami and by extension having ties with a lot of these Pakistani ISI funded organizations who enable them, help perhaps fund them, train them. Now, some of my colleagues at the Middle East Forum, and particularly in the Islamist Watch Project, would probably know a little more about this than I am. I'm ashamed to say, but there absolutely are ties between Pakistan, their ISI, their government itself, and some of the Islamist insurgencies that are ravaging Bangladesh today. Now, I understand we are now at the end of our podcast for today. I want to thank you all again for taking the time to listen to my babbling and my remarks on Bangladesh. As always, I thank you all for your questions and for your participation. Please be sure to join us on Wednesday for our Israel Insider podcast with Ashley Perry. And then on Friday, please be sure to join us for our second monthly Middle East Forum roundtable discussion hosted by Lori Regan, featuring a panel consisting of Middle East Forum's Jonathan Spire, Clifford May from the Foundation of Defensive Democracies, Michael Doran from the Hudson Institute, and Lori Regan. You can find more information on those podcasts on our website, where you can also register. We hope to see you all there. And again, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks.